of change management beyond just the tactical and just the data. There's a lot of behavioral and psychological implications to change management and ensuring that it's successful as well. And those are things that are harder to measure, but they are equally important. So here at HealthJoy, we are undergoing change management right now, and I'm guessing all of you are joining because you are about to embark on that journey, or you are at this very moment. And so I would, first of all, encourage all of you to set expectations with change management. It's not going to be an overnight program. It takes time, especially if you're talking just about behaviors and adoption. You have people who have been used to the status quo, and for a cohort of people in your organization, it might have worked really well. And so you are absolutely going to encounter some resistance. But let's talk about how do we measure adoption, and how do we measure the transition from resistance to ultimately buying into whatever the change management program may be. I always recommend starting backwards. Nick, you had mentioned that there is always that bottom line, that revenue specific KPI or goal that we're attacking. Let's work backwards from that. If you really want to get buy-in, of course, you're working with stakeholders that have influence, but you also need to be prepared to have data available and sharing it in the organization to say, this is why we are moving away from status quo. This is why we know it's not working anymore, and this is why we are implementing the change. I use 4 different metrics. They are activity, quality, adoption, and impact. Impact is going to be, again, those revenue specific KPIs. Activity is, think about it as simply, did it get done? These are really critical activities to the implementation of change management. It can get really unwieldy, so you want to focus on the most important activities that, if they didn't get done, could have a domino effect of the success of the change management program. Quality is, how well did we do? So there are a number of ways that we can capture that information. We can do quizzes, we can do surveys, and I'm speaking really broadly here because we're talking about change management in general. Maybe we'll make it a little bit more real and talk about new brand and messaging, and getting the sales team to adopt that new brand and messaging. So with quality, after a training, you want to know, how did people do? How well did they retain the information? And usually I recommend some kind of passing score, what you and leadership think is acceptable. Adoption is obviously super important. It's, how are we starting to see people buy into and adopt that brand and messaging, just as an example. And so whether you're using tools or regular meetings with stakeholders, having visibility is absolutely critical. We use Gong as an example, maybe use Chorus or some other conversation intelligence tool, and then regularly meeting with your stakeholders who might have closer relationships and visibility to your sales team to get insight into, are they adopting the messaging? Do they have reservations or hesitations still? And then, of course, impact, which again is those revenue specific indicators. So I'll hand it over to Karli, talking about change management and her experience and her thoughts about it and what makes it successful.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So I think one of the big things that I see in companies where there's a gap is that a lot of times leadership or even the project managers are scared to communicate with the teams for some reason. They're hesitant to send an email. They don't want to flood the inbox. They know how busy everybody is, right? But to me, clear, transparent, and consistent communication is one of the keys in change management. One of the things that I always do before we do any big project is just a little an impact assessment, right? Let's document the process from start to finish, and let's see who's even involved in it. And then from there, let's create a communication plan to give them not only our transparency of what's going to happen in the next coming months, but also just to kind of create a feedback loop, right? To say, hey, look, you guys, we're kicking off this project. Let's have a kickoff comm. Hey, we're mid-project update. How's everybody feeling? You might have seen some changes. Don't worry, we got it under control. I think the more that you communicate and the less hesitant you are to communicate with your teams, the more successful your change management is going to be. Whether the communication is going to be via email, maybe you do a Slack channel, maybe you have a newsletter that you add just a little blurb. There's a whole bunch of different mediums that you can use to ensure that the people that are actually impacted get communicated with. And then the last thing I'll say about communication is that when you document the process from start to finish, there's all of these obscure kind of groups that sometimes are involved, like think legal or IT, like your internal IT processes. Make sure that you're including those folks on those communications so that everybody and all the stakeholders are in the loop and they know what's going on. I'm telling you that the more communication is better, and don't be hesitant to just reach out and let people know what's going on, especially regarding change that can maybe be viewed as scary.
Yeah, I think the take there on documentation, I think, is key, because the more often than not, I've seen people get into roles and have absolutely no idea what they need to do. There was absolutely no documentation at all, or no process, or no alignment internally of anything, right? Be that a process, or be what you're looking at, the KPIs, and all that. How many times have we gone into meetings where we sit down, we try to analyze a report, and then realize that people are looking at the same KPIs but have completely different definitions about the same thing? That is the complete opposite of what enables change management to happen, right? For change management, for change as a whole to happen, people first need to be comfortable leaving the status quo behind and figuring that in order to advance, you need to change. That's just the natural progression of life, I guess, right? And humans are resistant to change in nature. They like control. And how do you overcome that? Is to make sure that everybody is talking on the same plane and have the same visibility of the same things and are aligned on the definitions. Easier said than done, of course, but one of the things that I usually do when I join any organization is to try and map out all of the primary KPIs that are relevant to each one of these teams. And as you said, Karli, you eventually start mapping out things that you didn't even think about from teams that were completely excluded that are so critical, legal, for example, to the overall process, that makes it vital for any success across the board, right? Because you can have a massively optimized revenue team, but if legal is not in the loop, when you get to negotiations, everything is slowed down. You just bring everybody down with you, right? So then you get massive bottlenecks, and that's kind of pointless. So that's why the overall alignment across the teams, making sure everybody's looking at the same thing, is extremely important. And you can only do that scalably if you have proper documentation across the board.